very important and probably also successful instrument for the future for Southeast Asia. And therefore, well, this is a very interesting approach to see, like, I think it's very interesting to see how micro-utilities perform in terms of their management structure and also in terms of like their technological approaches. So this is a quick survey of different micro-utilities throughout the world that I know, yeah, and which I have contact to and which I talk to derive the outcomes of this study. So like the main challenge of micro-utilities is walking down the economies of scale curve. So you see like economies of scale effects here on the left versus like sales per site in terms of kilowatt hours per year. And this down here is a logarithmic axis. Down here you've got sales of 10,000 kilowatt hours per year, which is really not that much, but which is in many cases in developing countries with a village of some 100 people, they usually do not consume much more than those 10,000 kilowatt hours per year because they just need electricity for lighting, they need electricity for fans, for watching TV a little bit, maybe radio, cell phone charging, that's it. Yeah, they usually don't have any air conditioners, they cannot afford. And the challenge is, like, economies of scale makes the kilowatt hour down here very expensive. If you can sell electricity up here for some 7 up to 10 US dollar cents per kilowatt hour, like what is the electricity cost price, or what is the electricity price like in Indonesia and main grids? How much is it? It's not that much, eh? How does that translate into US dollars or euros? 0.1 US dollars. Yeah, okay, 10 US dollars. It's subsidized. Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, like it is possible to do that. And here, up here, probably subsidies are probably some 30%, something like a maximum. Yeah, usually 20-30%. So electricity cost prices should be in the range of some 13-15 US dollar cents per kilowatt hour. Up here. So if you go down here, you can get up to $1 US per kilowatt hour or above, because, as you already said, like transporting the diesel, shipping the diesel to the village, shipping the renewable energy components to the village, installing them, maintaining them, operating them, is expensive. And that reflects, and especially what is most expensive is the operation down here. Like, how do you collect your tariffs in those small villages? How do you collect, how do you train the people? Because it's a completely different thing to use electricity in a microgrid, in an off-grid area, like in an island grid, than in a utility grid, large utility grid, in the main grid. And that is again like concurrency factor. That is again the concurrency factor. In a microgrid, you can use a little bit more electricity, power, and also energy per day than with a solar home system for the same electricity cost price. But it's still there's still a limit. So, for example, in our systems in Senegal, where we have approximately 1,000 people in one grid, and we install some like equivalent to 10 kilowatt peaks of photovoltaics. Sometimes we have small wind turbines in there, plus a 11 kVA diesel genset, kVA diesel genset, right? And we have an 80% renewable fraction in that grid and a 20%.
80% what?
80% renewable fraction and 20% conventional power from the diesel, which is the economic optimum yeah, we also use like Homer and other simulation tools to calculate that optimization. Yeah, well, we have problems to start up a 5 kVA asynchronous motor, because the inrush current is too high for the inverters we installed. So and that is a real problem. Like that limits the capability of the villagers to use electricity productively. In a large grid, in a national grid, 5 kVA genset, 5 kVA induction motor, you wouldn't even notice probably in most of the grids. But in the small grids, that makes a difference. It is really challenging. All right, and if you walk down this economy of scale curve, you mainly have 4 challenges to meet. First challenge is the technical system stability due to higher concurrency. That is what I already introduced. Second is the prevention of conflicts arising due to intransparent community decision-making structures. So in large national grids, people do not know each other. Yeah? You've got 1 million customers in that grid, or even more, and there is no structure of customers to enforce anything with the national utility. So there are different ways, different measures of how to regulate the utility, like through a regulatory authority, through the energy ministry, these kind of things. In a smaller system, in an island grid, people talk to each other. Probably all the customers even know each other, and there is no regulatory authority which takes care of this decision-making process. So it's a completely different deal in small systems, and that is one of the main aspects why island systems fail throughout the world. In South America, there were even some cases, I think it was in Chile, some cases where people, like villages, went and said, let's start a little bit earlier. So there was a large utility going into a village, installing an island grid there, running it, selling electricity. Unfortunately, that large utility was not reliable. So they had quite high prices, electricity prices, they had low quality of service. So the villagers said, okay, well, we are prepared to pay your high prices, but then you have to provide proper service. And a conflict arose. And this conflict resulted in the villagers not paying their electricity bills. And then the utility said, okay, if you don't pay your electricity bills, I will switch off the electricity. So they switched off. Then the villagers said, okay, well, if you switch off the electricity completely, we don't need you anymore. And then they went and said, okay, now let's destroy the system of this micro-utility. And they really went and destroyed the photovoltaic modules, they destroyed the generator, the gensets, because they said we'd rather live without electricity than this guy telling us what to do. Because this person, this utility, has got a very strong political power in the community. And especially they have strong political power and economic power once the villagers invested into productive purposes, like once they invested into sewing machines, into rice mills, into whatever, yeah, and maybe they even took loans to pay for their appliances. And then if they cannot use it, they cannot use the appliances because the electricity is not available, they could simply go bankrupt. So and that is a real conflict. And then I couldn't really understand why people went and destroyed the system. Because this guy from the utility, because of his bad service, they went bankrupt. Okay, so that is the second. The third one is revenue stabilization due to less diverse income sources of customers. In small communities, you usually have, most of the community members depend on the same income source. Like if you have a village at the coast, it's usually fishermen. 80% of the village income comes from fishing. If you are further inland, it's usually farming. In some areas you have, for example, large employers like mines or something where almost all of the male work at. Yeah, and then you completely depend on this income source also as a power supplier. And if this income source fails for whatever reason, like the fish simply doesn't occur anymore, it takes a different route, whatever. What we have seen in one of the communities in the Philippines already. Or if there is a disease in your crops, and yeah, simply you cannot harvest as much as expected. Or if this large company, if the mine is exploited, if they just close down the mine, yeah, then you as a micro-utility will go bankrupt immediately because you do not sell your electricity. And the last point is, so that is why you want to, as a micro-utility, you want to take care of the income sources of your customers. Make sure that you diversify the income sources. And that is what we also do in our grids in Africa. We make sure, like in the very first village electrified, for example, there are some tailors now who invested into electric sewing machines and set up tailoring shops. Before it was like farming. Now we have farming and tailoring, and we've got a rice mill, so they do not need to take the rice to outside of the village to get it milked. Yeah, and so that is like diversification of income sources. And the last point is the challenge of increasing operation and transaction costs per kilowatt hour produced with lowest, like smaller systems and smaller sites. Which means like you need very sophisticated, low cost but highly effective management approaches to make that work. And this is an example for the electricity cost price calculation or split of our systems in Senegal, and it will not look much different in Southeast Asia. It's mainly like transaction and head office costs, and that is due to a lot of transaction costs occurring mainly due to this transaction cost. Negotiation with all the different players in the sector, with national authorities, with the ministries, with fiscal policy, and then on the second level, the international support structure level, with donors, with CDM like UNFCCC to get the CO2 emission reduction certificates. Then foreign investment guarantors, if you've got foreign investment, that is all very complicated. What is that like actually in Indonesia? If a foreign investor wants to invest into the electricity sector in Indonesia as an IPP, for example, how is the foreign investment risk covered? Do you know that? That is one of the main challenges for companies coming in. Okay, let me show you how we do it. That is very okay. Use that one. Okay, so this is actually a smart grid approach, which covers a technological approach, which covers a socioeconomic approach, and the constellation of stakeholders approach. And yeah, I introduced the company already. So this is actually what we do, like my company. On the one hand, we have autonomous products like wind monitoring systems. We customized prototypes, our core business and the technical development services, prototype developing, small systems developing, like small series manufacturing, and on the right the technical business consultancy, especially regarding the micropower economy model and replication of that model in different countries. So this is what we walked through already. So this is actually the business model we developed and that won a number of awards. The business model actually consists of three components. First is the constellation of stakeholders, which says, okay, we need to make sure that everybody works into the same direction, fostering growth through concerted aims and actions. So that is the slogan for that. And we have the tariffs and billing model, which is based on an electricity block. I will go into that later on, which is a planning device for electricity customers. And we've got the micro-utility solution, which is a smart metering system, which can make like the constellation of stakeholders in the tariff and billing model happen. Without this smart metering system, the system wouldn't run from a technical point of view, but also from a organizational point of view. Now if we go into the constellation of stakeholders, we usually start with the village or the new citizen. If that is supported by a microfinance institution, we see, okay, then there might be happening something. And if we supply electricity to those people, then their their economical development might even be accelerated. And we say, okay, if you know, go and found a village power committee, we can come as the operator of the power supply system and supply electricity to the community. And we bring usually an investor, European investor or local investor, whatever, international, national. And now we sign a contract, which is more or less an IPP contract. It's a power purchase agreement with the village. The difference between the power purchase agreement of, for example, photovoltaic power plant connected to a central national grid, and this one is that in a national grid you simply produce and sell whatever you produce. Here, it's a different deal. You cannot always sell what you produce, but you have to cover a demand curve. And therefore you have to also supply peak power, you have to supply regulating power. It's not always baseload. And it's especially not, the baseload doesn't follow the curve of your photovoltaic or wind energy feeding. So you need some storage, usually. Or you need some very highly flexible power source, like, for example, a genset, or any other flexible power source. Okay, we can, okay, this contract actually has got a special feature. It is just valid in our system. It's just valid for a short period of time, for a 6-month period of time. 6 months means that is in between the planning horizon of a rural villager and the planning horizon of the operator of the power supply system. The villager would probably rather see a planning horizon of, or like a contract duration of some weeks, because usually they do their financial plannings in most developing countries in very short term. And the operator of the power supply system would probably rather see a planning horizon, like a contract duration of some 10, 15, 20 years. And to bring that together, we said, okay, we need to find something in the middle, which is in this case 6 months. And we can do that as an operator of the power supply system because we split the assets into movable and fixed assets. Whereas the fixed assets are all the assets that are firmly installed in the village, like the grid, the cables, the poles, like foundations, like buildings. And the movable assets is everything that can be moved, like also photovoltaic modules, like the stands for the photovoltaic modules, like the batteries, like small gensets, inverters, distribution boxes, all of that. Everything that could be put back on the pickup truck and taken away. And as these assets are movable, we say, okay, if the village doesn't prolong the contract after 6 months, we can still take our movable assets and we are out. And this is how we overcome the conflicts potential of the single operator that I already introduced for the South American example. So we say, okay, we are the power station operator, or the operator of the power supply system, but we do not want to assume the political power that usually a power system operator has, which runs the whole thing as a natural monopoly. So we want to break the national monopoly here and create a market in the island trades, and that can be done by splitting the assets into movable and fixed assets. So, and then there is a very complicated part, getting in touch with the electrification authority and the regulatory authority. Have you got an electrification authority in Indonesia? Or an electrification agency or something? Or is that all done by the utility? Okay. Is there a regulatory authority?
What do you mean about this?
Like the regulatory authority is usually a body of the energy ministry.
Under Minister of Energy.
Under local government.
Right, and they take care of the locally charged tariffs of electricity and other energy sources. That you probably have, huh? The special aspect about right, you have got IPPs there also, so they probably also take care of the tariffs the IPP charge to the national utility. Yeah, so that is probably their job mainly, and they take care of the revenue and margins of the national utility. So, and then often you have like donor organizations for off-grid electrification, or there are funds available from the national government or from local government or whatever, yeah, that could be invested into the fixed assets, into the grid, into the buildings, into the foundations. It's very important that those subsidies do not go into the movable assets, because then you would have destroyed the market immediately. Like the small market we just created by splitting the assets. Because, well, the villages or the village power committee needs to have the option after 6 months to compare and find out, okay, maybe I can find somebody like a genset operator which can run the system more cost effectively than this guy INENSUS, whatever, this micro utility, and then they can change over. They simply dismiss the old power supplier and take a new one. So that is the whole idea of constellation of stakeholders with the micropower economy. Once the national grid operator comes up here, it says, okay, now it makes sense, like the demand of that village is large enough to extend the grids. Transmission grid, connect to the distribution grid, to the local distribution grid, and supply electricity there. Still, like the old power station operator can move out, taking the movable assets out, and leave the fixed assets in which he does not have, like he has not invested into the fixed assets, he only invested into movable assets, and take his own investment out and leave the grid to the national grid operator. Or, if the national grid operator is not that reliable, you could still say, okay, we purchase the electricity from the national grid operator, make sure that our village has got 24/7 electricity supply, and work as a backup system, for example. All right, so that was the first component of the 3 components. The second component,
I have a
yeah.
question. First is how we choose this village? What is the criteria or parameters that you choose this?
Choose the village.
Normally.
Okay, if you have a private sector micro-utility involved, they will choose the village based on economic aspects. For example, they will select villages that are rather large, because then they can climb up the economies of scale ladder a little bit. They will select villages which are dense, like densely populated, not too far spread, because it is more effort to operate and manage a grid which is too large. And of course, grid losses also factor in. Then they would probably choose a village which has good potential for productive use of electricity, especially like you usually see a big jump in productive use when you change over from several hours per day of electricity supply to 24/7 electricity supply. That is usually the point in time when people start investing into productive purposes. And then you see a jump in electricity demand. Like these island grids you have in Indonesia, they are probably not run 24/7, are they? Do you know? You're mainly in the main grid area, the main grid sector, yeah. Yeah, right. So usually, as far as I know, usually it doesn't make sense to run them 24/7 on diesel if they are less than, let's say, 5,000 people or something like that, or 4,000 people. And therefore, in smaller villages, they usually just have some 6, 5, 4 hours per day of electricity supply during evening hours for lighting purposes, mainly charging of cell phones and these kind of things. Okay, with our system, we say, okay, we want to tap the productive use potential in those grids, because that is the factor which makes the electricity demand grow and which can bring us up on the economies of scale ladder. And up the economies of scale ladder means on the first lower risk because of better diversification of income sources of the villages, means lower electricity cost prices, which can on the one hand result in larger margins, but on the other hand result in lower tariffs, which again has got an economies of scale effect. Yeah, lower tariffs means like people will also consume more because they can afford more electricity. Yeah, well, and this is what we want to see. This is what we want to see, and this is how we can make the whole business economically profitable. All right, so this is actually the second component. We supply electricity in our systems 24/7, and we ask the customers, like each household, to tell us what electricity demand they will have in the future. So we ask them, okay, how many light bulbs do you want? Like, how many fluorescent lights do you want to use? How many LED lights? How many cell phones do you want to charge per day? How many fans do you want to operate at the same time? Or how many hours per day do you want to operate those fans? What about TV? How many hours per day do you use that TV? What size of TV do you have? What size of radio do you have? These kind of things. Or even like sewing machines, whatever, or electric machines, kitchen machines, machines used in the kitchen, machines used for productive purposes, all these kind of things. So we go into the households and find out what they want to use. And we cover their usage in electricity blocks. The electricity blocks comprise a certain power bandwidth and an energy content to be consumed within 1 week. And we charge a price, like electricity price for that. And in this case, this is an example. The power bandwidth is 50 watts. The energy content per week is 2 kilowatt hours. And the energy price, like the price per block, is €1.40, is like 70 cents per kilowatt hour, which is quite high, but which is reasonable in a small grid. And which is very reasonable compared to the energy sources usually used in villages before they get access to electricity. Because like candles, kerosene lamps, or like small flashlights are much more expensive. If you calculate that back to the kilowatt hour price, you end up at like 2, 3, 4, 5 euros per kilowatt hours, meaning some 6, 7 US dollars per kilowatt hour. If you charge a cell phone and you have to pay $1 per charge, electricity price per kilowatt hour can go up to 50 US dollars per kilowatt hour or above. And that is very common in Africa, and I'd say in some regions, as far in the Philippines, I have seen that also, that people really pay a lot